Hello everyone, my name is Brooke Shetler. I study at Mount Vernon Nazarene University, and for my senior practicum I was placed at Chain Foundation in Uganda, and then my client's name has also been changed to protect confidentiality. But my client is Jane. She is a 16-year-old female currently studying in the tailoring program at Chain Vocational School. Before coming to Chain, she lived with both of her parents and 4 younger brothers. However, past assessments have also described that she has older siblings who are now out of the house. Her father is a peasant farmer, and her mother sells some produce in just a small stand along the road. Jane helps out around the house when she's at home. She helps out in the garden, helping to sell food with her mother, and she also helps care for her younger brothers, for the young children. So living at home, she lives in some pretty severe poverty. She reports eating very little food each day. I know past assessments have said that she and her siblings get 2 meals a day. However, when speaking with her, I suspect that it's even less than that, just with her attitude and her body language. She reports having lack of proper clothing, lack of shoes, lack of bedding. And then she also dropped out of school when she was in senior 2 due to a lack of school fees and the inability to provide scholastic materials. And then some other signs of the poverty that they live in, done by other Chain staff on these assessments, is they noted that they have a lack of a utensil rack, lack of a rubbish pit. The pit latrine that they have needs repaired. It doesn't have a proper door. And then also the water, their source of water is drawn from a distant well, and that's not safe for drinking either. And then one of the staff commented on one of these assessments. She said that Jane is currently deprived of adequate clothing, and although she tries to study, she in most cases runs out of scholastic materials due to the impoverishment of their household. And so that's just some signs of the poverty that her and her family are living in. However, now that she's at Chain, she is enjoying her life. She has made some good friends with both the staff and her peers. She enjoys playing netball and football with her friends. And then she's in the tailoring program, so she aspires to be a gown designer, like one of the fancy gowns, wedding dresses, and everything. However, she also expressed a wish to finish her classes in the secondary school. And she actually reported feeling badly about having to drop out with that. And even while she's at Chain, she still experiences some effects of the poverty. For example, she reports having inadequate clothing and inadequate shoes. So that's something that she's still struggling with. And then also, while she's at Chain, no one is actually paying for her school fees. Sort of this setup that they have right now is that Jane will continue, or will do some chores around Chain to sort of compensate for those classes. So the assessments of the problem, Chain, the main problem is the challenge of living in poverty. And actually Chain conducted it's called a Household Vulnerability Assessment Tool, or HVAT, on the household. And her household scored in the slightly vulnerable category, which is a little misleading because her house slightly sounds like it's barely vulnerable. However, I calculated many of these scores for many different households, and most of them scored in ready to graduate, even though the household was still in a vulnerable state. So to score in a slightly vulnerable is more extreme than what it actually sounds like. And then, like I said earlier, poverty has affected Jane because she has had to drop out of school in senior 2 because of the lack of school fees and the inability to provide the scholastic materials. And also, like I said, she is still lacking adequate clothing and proper shoes. That was something that she explicitly said when I was talking to her about any challenges that she's still facing. And then something else I noted as a potential problem is possibly the relationship that she has with her family. While she's staying at Chain, she's not there. She's sort of cut off from her family. It's almost like Chain has now become her family with the relationships that she's made. And then to go along with that, she reported that she will be staying at Chain during the holidays rather than going back home with her family, which surprised me a little bit. I expected her to be like sort of upset with that decision, not being able to be with her family. However, she seemed sort of relieved and very comfortable with that decision. All right, so her strengths, she definitely still has some strengths. For example, living with her family, she was taught how to dig, she was taught how to cook, how to care for small children, which are all skills that are needed in like everyday life in this context. To like survive in Uganda, you need to know how to do these things. Along with this, she is in the tailoring program at Chain, so she's learning skills such as like how to sew, how to make clothes, how to run a small business. She can understand and speak English fairly well, which will continue to help her as she grows older and starts her own business. She will have a greater clientele because of her ability to communicate with more people. Along with this, living in poverty has taught her the importance of hard work and having an education. So she's very determined to make this work. She's smart, she loves to learn, and she's also very social, makes friends very easily, gets along very well with her peers and with other Chain staff. Okay, so intervention history. Jane and her family have been a part of Chain for many years now. They've been a part of the Orphans and Vulnerable Children Project, or OVC, for several years, and working with the family, Chain staff has done assessments. They've helped support the children in getting their education. They've also advised the family on like any next steps that they should take. For example, like the father doesn't have a written will, and so the staff has like advised him, this is something that you need to do, and he has promised to make that step. However, as far as I know, I don't think that he's done that yet. Along with this, interventions have had very little impacts or improvements on the family, except like I was looking at the different assessments that they've done in the past, and there was almost no change between the assessment that they did in August 2017 and their most recent one done in January of 2018, except there was a slight betterment in the clothing that the children were wearing. Other than that, all the previous problems were still there. Along with this, this poverty led to Jane dropping out of school and then joining the vocational school at Chain, which is like their most recent assessment that Chain has done. And this intervention began with her traveling back and forth between her home and Chain to attend the vocational school classes, and that went on for several months before the administration decided that it was important for her to remain on Chain campus. So the current intervention is for her to stay at Chain while she's doing her vocational classes. And this is a special case because Chain doesn't offer housing for students in the vocational school. It's something that they would like to do, but they just don't have the capacity for it yet. However, the administration thought that this was an important next step to take because Jane and her family live about 30 kilometers away from Chain, and so traveling back and forth was just creating a problem. She would either have to take a boat, she would have to walk, she would have to find some sort of transportation to get to Chain, and that put her in a more vulnerable state of like kind strangers offering this transportation, and then like in exchange for what? So Chain felt that it wasn't worth it to put her in that vulnerable state. So she currently is staying at Chain with two other girls who are in similar situations, and they're also studying in the tailoring program. And this intervention was implemented about a month ago. Since then, she's been at Shane studying in the vocational school. They went about this by, they visited the household, they explained everything to Jane and her parents, they received permission from them. So the agreement is basically that Shane will provide the housing for Jane, but the parents are still responsible for providing like clothing, for bedding. While she's at Shane, she'll obviously like eat meals there. That's something that is that she helps out with in exchange for school fees. She'll help like make meals, clean the compound, any other small chores that can be done around Shane to help sort of compensate for lack of school fees. And then the prognosis, I believe that this will have a positive outcome. I know Jane, she's a hard worker. As long as she continues to have that hard work, she will be able to graduate from the vocational school, be able to open just a small business and start earning money for herself and then for her family as well. Like I said, she's a good student, and even in the short time that she stayed at Shane, we've seen a positive change in her attitude and her behavior. She's become more outgoing, more confident in herself. So that's something that we hope will continue as she continues to live at Shane. However, if for some reason this intervention has a poor outcome, one of the suggestions that I have that could be like a next step for them is maybe employing Jane at Shane to help repair some of the clothing or like the school uniforms that the other children are wearing. There's an orphanage and also like a primary school on Shane premises, and I've noticed that many of the children have like some tears in their clothing or their school uniforms, so maybe it would be feasible for her to like repair that, and that would also be helping her refine like her sewing skills that will improve in the future. And then some ethical considerations that I was thinking about is like this intervention seems really helpful for Jane. You know, she's living pretty comfortably at Shane in a safe environment, able to learn. However, I was wondering, like, what is the impact that this is having on her family? There are still 4 young children who are staying in that home. They're not able to do as much work as Jane was. Is this putting a greater strain on her parents, as now they sort of have to juggle more of like trying to earn a living and care for the children, and not having that extra help that Jane provided? And then also, how is this intervention affecting Jane's relationship with her parents? Because it already seemed that she was like sort of distant from them, like being happy and willing to not go home for the holidays. I was wondering, you know, will this even create even more distance? Like how will that just affect the family dynamic of her living at Shane? But yeah, any questions or responses?
Hi, thank you. Yes, actually, I was thinking about that as well, and I know that family is such an important part of African life here. So I was wondering, has your supervisor mentioned like reconciliation between the family or counseling? Has your supervisor, what insight has your supervisor given to you about this dilemma?
Yeah, it's not something that we've like explicitly talked about actually. Because I don't think the relationship between Jane and her parents is like estranged or that it's bad. I think that they really do love each other. I'm just worried that this will like create some distance between them. But yeah, it's not something that we've really talked about.
Thank you, Brooke. I just wanted to point out that I appreciated your insight about like noticing other children there and highlighting Jane's strengths and maybe making her feel more involved in like guiding, I don't know, others to work together and do that. So I really appreciated that. But I had a question. So when will Jane graduate from the vocational school?
Yeah, the vocational school, I'm trying to think. We just had a graduation this last week. So I believe it's about a year-long program because the vocational school is a very new thing at Chain. And I believe that this was the first graduation that they've had. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Have you talked to her, and has she shared any like desires to go back to live with her family once she's done, or do the dreams of being a gown designer, like, will that lead her somewhere farther away from her family?
Yeah, I think that she will return to her family to help care and provide for her brothers and help with her parents. I think right now, like, to be a gown designer is like her ultimate dream. I think for her it's like just very far in the future right now. But the next step is to like graduate from vocational school and like begin just like a small shop of like making her own clothes and beginning very small in that way.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you think her family supports her wanting to go to school, or do you think that they want her to be around for more help?
Yeah, I think just from, we've done a few home visits with her and her family, and her parents seem very supportive of her getting an education. So it's sort of like a complicated thing of, you know, they want the best for her. They want her to be able to go out and like do that and like work her way out of the poverty situation. But yeah, it's like they could still use her help. So I think if feasible, they would absolutely want her to continue with her education.
Is there the other siblings, do they help around the house for the parents, or are they all just younger?
I'm sure they do. I believe the ages are like 9, 6, 4, and 2. So I think the older two are probably able to do some small chores. However, like Jane is 16 years old, she would have been able to do a lot more than the younger ones. And then also just the fact of, you know, like having to care for the very little ones. I don't know if the 9 and 6-year-old would have that capacity. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks so much, Brooke. Oh, it is on. Okay. Is it common for the students of the vocational school to have complications with getting transport to and from school most days? Yeah,
I think, like I said, she's staying with 2 other girls who are in the same situation. So for sure, it's at least those 3 that were having complications with transportation, and Chain just didn't want to put them in that more vulnerable state. However, I believe most of the vocational students live closer, because this Chain is in Mukono. So I believe that most of them are able to have like housing that are closer to Chain. As far as I know from remembering, like we did some profiles for the other vocational students, and part of that was like, which village do you come from? And so I believe that most of them were a little bit closer, or it was easier for them to get transportation.
Is Chain looking to like possibly change the policies for vocational school housing, or are they just like, if it would be a complication, they would just allow them to stay there?
Yeah, I think one of the goals that Chain has is to provide housing for vocational students. It's just at this point, like the vocational school itself is very new. So at this point, they're just not at that level with funding and everything. Yeah, they're just not there yet. Mm-hmm. Thank you.